Christina Marie Riggs, born September 2, 1971 in Lawton, Oklahoma, Christina Marie Riggs worked as a licensed practical nurse in Sherwood, Arkansas. Her childhood was marked by reported inappropriate experiences with a stepbrother and neighbor, leading to substance use beginning at age 14 and her first pregnancy at 16. She married sailor John Riggs in 1993, but the marriage ended following alleged domestic issues. By 1997, she was a struggling single mother earning just $17,000 annually while drowning in debt. Riggs suffered from severe chronic depression with a documented family history of self-harm, creating a perfect storm of financial and mental health crises that would spiral toward tragedy. On November 4, 1997, at her Sherwood home, Riggs sedated both of her children with the antidepressant Elavil. Using her nursing knowledge, she attempted to use potassium chloride, believing it would cause a painless passing. But when that method failed, she took more drastic measures to end their lives. She wrote detailed notes explaining her intentions, consumed 28 Elavil tablets herself, and injected potassium chloride into her own system, attempting to follow them in passing. Her mother discovered her unconscious the following day and immediately called 911, leading to her survival and subsequent arrest. What drove a trained nurse to such desperate actions? Riggs confessed immediately upon regaining consciousness and was charged with 2 counts of capital offense. At her June 1998 trial in Pulaski County Circuit Court, she entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Her defense team presented extensive evidence of her depression, financial desperation, and deteriorating mental state. However, the jury rejected the insanity defense in just 55 minutes, finding her guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase, Riggs made a statement that would become infamous. "I want to die. I want to be with my babies." She actively requested the ultimate punishment and waived all appeals, telling the court she deserved to face the consequences. Judge John Plegg honored her request. On May 2, 2000, at Cummins Unit in Arkansas, Riggs was executed by lethal injection at age 28, becoming the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845 and the youngest woman executed in the modern United States era. Her final words echoed her courtroom statement, "I love you, my babies." The execution sparked national debate about mental health, the justice system's treatment of maternal cases, and whether someone suffering from severe depression could truly make an informed decision to waive appeals. The case raised profound questions about the intersection of mental illness and criminal responsibility. Riggs had sought help multiple times before the incident, but the mental health system failed to provide adequate intervention. Her attorney stated she genuinely believed ending her life and her children's lives together would spare them from suffering in a world she could no longer navigate. Mental health advocates pointed to her case as evidence that the system punishes illness rather than treating it. Arkansas prison officials noted that Riggs showed no resistance as her execution approached. She spent her final days writing letters and refused to fight the sentence, maintaining that being reunited with her children in the afterlife was her only wish. The warden reported she appeared calm and resigned to her fate during her final hours. Her execution remained controversial for years afterward. Opponents argued that executing someone with documented severe mental illness violated ethical standards, while supporters maintained that her nursing knowledge demonstrated she understood the consequences of her actions. The debate centered on whether depression so severe it leads to such acts should be considered differently under the law. While Riggs sought to end her pain through the ultimate penalty, the next case would captivate the nation through an elaborate deception. Susan Smith, born September 26, 1971 in Union, South Carolina. Susan Smith's childhood was marked by tragedy and inappropriate experiences. Her father ended his own life when she was just 6 years old, leaving her vulnerable to inappropriate attention from her stepfather, Beverly Russell, which began when she was 15. Smith attempted to end her own life twice during her teenage years, showing early signs of severe emotional distress. She married David Smith in 1991 while expecting their first child, but the marriage quickly deteriorated as both engaged in extramarital relationships. By October 1994, Smith was pursuing a relationship with wealthy local man Tom Findley, who broke things off with her, stating he didn't want children in his life. On October 25, 1994, Smith drove her Mazda protege to John D. Long Lake with both sons inside. She released the parking brake and watched as the car rolled 122 feet down a boat ramp into the dark water, ending both young lives. Then she fabricated an elaborate story about a carjacking, describing a black man as the perpetrator. This false accusation triggered nationwide outrage and racial tension, with search parties combing the area for days. For 9 days, Smith made tearful television appeals for her children's return, becoming a sympathetic figure in the national media. She finally confessed on November 3, 1994, after inconsistencies in her story mounted, and investigators grew suspicious. How did this mother fool an entire nation? The July 1995 trial in Union County became a media sensation. Her defense team included David Bruck and Judy Clark, who would later defend high-profile clients, including the Unabomber. They presented extensive evidence of Smith's history of experiences, including the inappropriate relationship with her stepfather and her diagnosis of dependent personality disorder. The defense argued she was a deeply damaged woman who snapped under pressure. The prosecution, led by 32-year-old Tommy Pope, painted a different picture. A calculating woman who eliminated her children to pursue a romance with a man who didn't want to be a stepfather. The jury convicted Smith in just 2.5 hours, but they voted against the ultimate punishment, instead sentencing her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This decision sparked debate about gender bias in sentencing, with some arguing a father would have received a harsher penalty for identical actions. Smith has been incarcerated at Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina, since her conviction. Her prison record has been far from exemplary. In 2000, she engaged in inappropriate relationships with 2 correctional officers, both of whom lost their jobs as a result. She has faced multiple disciplinary actions for substance violations and other infractions over the years. Most recently, in August 2024, she received a disciplinary write-up for communicating with a documentary filmmaker, violating prison communication policies. Her first parole hearing took place on November 20, 2024, drawing massive media attention from across the country. David Smith, her ex-husband, testified against her release, making an emotional statement. That's only 15 years per child. The parole board unanimously denied her request by a vote of 5-0, noting her disciplinary record and lack of genuine remorse. During the hearing, Smith offered apologies but struggled to explain her actions convincingly. The denial means Smith will remain behind bars for at least 2 more years, with her next parole hearing scheduled for November 2026. She will be 55 years old at that time. Legal experts believe she faces an uphill battle for eventual release, as the notoriety of her case and the calculated nature of her deception work strongly against her. Each parole hearing will require her to demonstrate genuine rehabilitation and remorse, something she has struggled to convey thus far in her statements and behavior. The Smith case fundamentally changed how law enforcement handles missing children cases and highlighted the dangers of racial profiling in criminal investigations. Her false accusation of a black perpetrator exposed deep racial tensions in America and led to reforms in how media and police approach such claims without evidence. From a calculated deception to a case of devastating revenge, The next involves a seemingly perfect family torn apart by divorce. Marilyn Lemack. Born May 30th, 1957, in Evergreen Park, Illinois, Marilyn Lemack appeared to have achieved the American dream. She earned a master's degree in nursing from the prestigious Rush University and built a successful career as a surgical nurse, respected by colleagues for her competence and professionalism. She married Dr. David Lemack in 1985, and together they created what neighbors described as an ideal family life with 3 children in the affluent Chicago suburb of Naperville. Their marriage seemed stable and happy to outsiders, with the family active in community activities, making what came next even more shocking to everyone who knew them. The facade began cracking in February 1999 when David and Marilyn separated after years of marriage. David had begun a relationship with a woman named Janice Ryan, which Marilyn discovered and became fixated upon. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly as the divorce proceedings progressed, and she faced losing her family structure. She was being treated for depression with Zoloft, with her dosage increased to 200 milligrams daily, and was also taking the anti-anxiety medication Ativan. Despite this pharmaceutical intervention, her psychological state continued to decline as she faced losing both her marriage and the life she had carefully built. On March 4th, 1999, Marilyn drove past David's residence and saw Janice Ryan's car parked there, confirming her worst fears about their relationship. That discovery became the catalyst for an unthinkable decision. She returned home to Naperville and crushed Ativan tablets into peanut butter spread on bagels, feeding them to her 3 children to sedate them. Once they were drowsy from the medication, she ended each of their lives, methodically going from child to child. She then attempted to end her own life through a combination of overdose and self-inflicted wounds to her wrists, but survived the attempt. When she called 911, her first words to the operator were chilling and would become central evidence. "I did it. My husband didn't want us anymore." Those words would prove crucial to the prosecution's case, demonstrating what they argued was a clear, vengeful motive rather than a psychotic break from reality. How did prosecutors prove this was revenge and not insanity? DuPage County State's Attorney Joseph Burkett personally took on the prosecution, recognizing the case's significance to the community. The trial became a high-stakes battle of psychiatric experts on both sides. The defense brought in specialists who testified that Marilyn's combination of Zoloft and severe depression had created a psychotic state where she genuinely believed ending her children's lives would protect them from suffering. They argued she was legally insane at the time of the acts under Illinois law. The prosecution countered with their own psychiatric experts and pointed to extensive evidence of premeditation, the calculated crushing of pills into food, the methodical nature of the acts, and her immediate statement acknowledging what she'd done and blaming David. Prosecutor Burkett described her as an angry, manipulative woman who chose revenge over reason, eliminating her children to punish her husband. The jury deliberated for nearly 10 hours on December 19, 2001 before returning guilty verdicts, rejecting the insanity defense. On May 30, 2002, Marilyn's 45th birthday, Judge George Bacalus sentenced her to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. The symbolism of the sentencing date was not lost on courtroom observers. The judge stated that while he acknowledged her mental health struggles, the evidence clearly showed she knew right from wrong when she acted. Marilyn Lemack has been incarcerated at Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois, for over 2 decades. Remarkably, she has become what prison officials call a model prisoner. She instructs the baking apprenticeship program, teaching other inmates valuable culinary skills they can use upon release. Staff members describe her as cooperative, remorseful, and dedicated to helping others, a stark contrast to the woman who committed such acts in 1999. In 2022, LaMock filed for executive clemency through the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, presenting a compelling medical argument. Her petition focused on Zoloft, noting that the FDA added a black box warning to the medication in 2004, 5 years after her acts, warning about increased risks of unusual behavior and self-harm in some patients, particularly when dosages are increased rapidly. Her attorneys argued she was essentially a victim of an unknown medication side effect rather than a cold-blooded offender. The Illinois Prisoner Review Board considered her petition, hearing testimony from medical experts about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and their potential psychiatric side effects. As of March 2024, Governor J.B. Pritzker had not ruled on the clemency petition, leaving LaMock's fate uncertain. Legal observers note that clemency in such high-profile cases is extremely rare in Illinois, regardless of medical evidence presented. Additionally, Logan Correctional Center is slated for closure and rebuilding, which will require transferring all inmates, including LaMock, to other facilities in the coming years. The LaMock case sparked important conversations about mental health treatment during divorce proceedings and the potential dangers of antidepressant medications, particularly when dosages are increased rapidly without adequate monitoring. While depression and medication played a role in LaMock's case, the next involves a woman struggling with lost status and cultural identity. Elżbieta Płakowska. Born in 1972 in eastern Poland, Elżbieta Płakowska grew up as the daughter of a pediatrician, enjoying a comfortable middle-class life and social standing in her community. Her mother immigrated to the United States when Elżbieta was just 8 years old, leaving her behind in Poland with relatives, an abandonment that would shape her psychological development and attachment issues. She dropped out of high school when she became pregnant and married Artur Płakowska in 1992. Around 2000, she immigrated to America on a tourist visa, hoping to reunite with her mother and build a better life in the Promised Land. The reality of immigrant life devastated Płakowska's sense of self and identity. In Poland, she had been someone of importance, the daughter of a respected doctor with social status and recognition. In America, she found work as a house cleaner and babysitter, jobs she felt were beneath her and represented a humiliating fall from her previous standing in society. She struggled profoundly with this loss of identity and status, unable to reconcile who she had been with who she had become. The language barrier, cultural isolation, and menial work created a toxic psychological environment that festered for years. In October 2012, her father passed away back in Poland, triggering a sharp increase in her alcohol consumption and behavioral changes that concerned friends and family. People close to her noticed her becoming more withdrawn, drinking heavily throughout the day, and making odd statements about heaven and the afterlife. However, no one anticipated the horror that would come next. On October 30th, 2012, Płakowska was babysitting at the Dworakowski family home in Naperville, Illinois. That evening, she ended the life of her own son, Justin, and the young girl she was caring for, Olivia Dworakowski. She also took the lives of both family dogs in the home. Before the acts, she told her son he was going to heaven tonight, words that would later haunt investigators and prosecutors as evidence of premeditation. After the horrific events, she fabricated an elaborate robbery story to explain the scene, left a rambling voicemail at a Catholic church saying she had done something bad, and arrived at a friend's home covered in visible evidence of what had occurred. What convinced the court she knew exactly what she was doing? Prosecutors charged Płakowska with 10 counts of first-degree ending of life, treating each victim and each different method as separate counts under Illinois law. Her defense team argued she had suffered a complete psychotic break triggered by her father's passing, alcohol consumption, and the accumulated experience of her diminished status and cultural displacement. They presented extensive psychiatric testimony suggesting she was in an altered mental state and could not appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions at the time. The prosecution built a methodical case demonstrating premeditation and awareness of her actions. They pointed to her statement to her son about heaven, the fabricated robbery story, her attempts to cover up what happened by cleaning herself, and her creation of a false narrative. These actions, they argued, showed a woman who knew right from wrong and was attempting to evade consequences for what she'd done. Plakowska chose a bench trial before Judge Robert Miller rather than a jury trial, hoping a single experienced judge might be more sympathetic to complex psychiatric testimony than lay jurors. However, after hearing weeks of evidence and expert testimony from both sides, Judge Miller issued his ruling in September 2017. Guilty on all counts. In his detailed written decision, the judge explicitly found that Plakowska had substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality of her conduct at the time of the acts, directly rejecting the insanity defense. On December 15, 2017, Judge Miller sentenced her to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 2 years for the animal cruelty charges. The judge stated that the premeditated nature of the acts and the vulnerability of the victims warranted the maximum sentence allowed under Illinois law. Plakowska's defense team filed appeals arguing the judge had misapplied the insanity standard and had given insufficient weight to the psychiatric evidence presented. The Illinois Appellate Court heard the case and in August 2020 issued a detailed ruling affirming the conviction. The appellate judges found that Judge Miller had properly weighed the evidence and that his findings were well supported by the record. All of Plakowska's appeals have been exhausted, and she remains in the Illinois Department of Corrections serving her life sentence with no possibility of release. The case highlighted the profound challenges immigrant women face in maintaining mental health while navigating cultural displacement and loss of social identity, though it also demonstrated that such struggles do not excuse criminal acts or absolve responsibility. From questions of immigrant identity to secrets hidden for nearly 2 decades, the next case shocked an entire state. Megan Huntsman. Born February 26, 1975 in Pleasant Grove, Utah, Megan Huntsman grew up in the close-knit Latter-day Saints community that defines much of Utah culture and social life. She married her high school sweetheart Darren West in April 1993, and they started what appeared to outsiders to be a typical Utah family life with children and community involvement. However, their marriage deteriorated as both descended into methamphetamine addiction and their home became characterized by domestic turmoil and substance use. West was imprisoned from 2006 to 2014 for drug-related charges, leaving Huntsman alone in their Pleasant Grove home for 8 critical years. During that time, Huntsman lived an unimaginable double life that would later shock investigators. Between 1996 and 2006, she gave birth to 7 babies at home, concealing each pregnancy from everyone around her, neighbors, family members, friends, and even her other children who lived in the house. She would later tell investigators she was too messed up on meth to care for additional children beyond the 3 she was already raising. Of the 7 infants, 6 were born alive, and their lives ended shortly after birth. 1 was stillborn. She stored their remains in cardboard boxes in the garage of their Pleasant Grove home, where they remained hidden for up to 18 years. The horrific secret remained concealed until April 12, 2014, when Darren West was released from prison after serving his 8-year sentence. As he began cleaning the garage to reorganize their home and restart their lives, he discovered a box that felt unusually heavy. When he opened it and saw what was inside, he was horrified and immediately called police, setting in motion one of the most shocking investigations in Utah history. How did she hide 7 pregnancies from everyone around her? Investigators were stunned by the scope of what they discovered during the search of the property. DNA testing confirmed all 7 infants were Huntsman's biological children, and that Darren West was the father of all 7. The medical examiner determined that 6 of the 7 had taken at least 1 breath after birth, meaning they were born alive. Huntsman confessed to police during interrogation, providing detailed accounts of each birth, and explaining her methamphetamine addiction had made her incapable of caring for more children, so she made the decision to end their lives shortly after each birth. The Pleasant Grove community was absolutely devastated by the revelations. Neighbors who had lived next door for years were shocked that such acts could occur without anyone noticing changes or suspicious behavior. The case raised profound questions about how someone could conceal multiple pregnancies, especially in a tight-knit LDS community where neighbors typically notice such changes and offer support. Huntsman apparently hid the pregnancies through loose clothing, avoiding social situations during the later months, and the chaos of methamphetamine addiction that kept people at a distance. Huntsman was charged with 6 counts of first-degree ending of life for the 6 babies born alive. On February 12, 2015, she entered guilty pleas to all 6 counts in exchange for prosecutors dropping the death penalty as an option and agreeing not to pursue additional charges. During her plea hearing, she showed little emotion as the prosecutor detailed each case and the medical examiner's findings. Her attorney explained that she suffered from severe mental health issues and substance addiction, but acknowledged these did not excuse her actions. At her April 20, 2015 sentencing hearing, Judge Darrell McDade expressed his shock at the case, stating, "I really thought I had seen it all until this case." He sentenced her to 6 consecutive life terms, specifically structuring the sentence to ensure she would serve the maximum time possible under Utah law. He ordered 3 life sentences to run consecutively, followed by 3 more concurrent life sentences, creating a longer minimum term than the plea agreement had actually contemplated. Huntsman is currently incarcerated at Utah State Correctional Facility in northwestern Salt Lake City, a state-of-the-art $1 billion facility that opened in July 2022, replacing the aging Draper Prison. Her first opportunity for parole will come in April 2064, when she will be 89 years old. Given the nature and scope of her acts, parole is considered highly unlikely even at that distant date. Because Huntsman pleaded guilty, she waived her right to appeal the conviction, and no appeals have been filed in her case. She has spent over a decade behind bars, and according to prison officials, has been a compliant inmate who participates in available programs and causes no disciplinary problems. While Huntsman hid her acts for nearly 2 decades, the next case involved a military family torn apart by untreated mental illness. Julie Schenecker, born January 13, 1961, in Muscatine, Iowa. Julie Schenecker built an impressive military career that took her around the world. She served in the U.S. Army as a Russian linguist and military interrogator, achieving the rank of sergeant and earning respect for her language skills and analytical abilities in intelligence work. She met Colonel Parker Schenecker while both were stationed in Munich, Germany, and they married, beginning a military family life that would take them to various postings around the world before they settled in the upscale Tampa Palms neighborhood of Tampa, Florida. Despite outward appearances of a successful military family with status and stability, Julie struggled with severe mental health issues dating back to the early 1990s. She carried diagnoses of bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and severe depression, a complex combination of conditions that required careful management and monitoring. In 2001, she was hospitalized for 9 months due to a debilitating depressive episode, spending that entire period in an inpatient psychiatric facility receiving intensive treatment. The incident should have been a clear warning sign of the severity of her mental illness and fragility. In November 2010, just months before the acts that would destroy the family, Tampa police investigated after her daughter reported being hit by Julie. The investigation documented concerning behavior, but did not result in criminal charges or significant intervention by authorities. By January 2011, Parker was deployed to the Middle East as part of his military duties, leaving Julie alone with the children despite her extensively documented mental health challenges and history. On January 27, 2011, Julie purchased a .38 caliber revolver at a gun store, going through Florida's mandatory 3-day waiting period without raising any red flags. During those 3 days of waiting, she wrote in her journal that the waiting period would delay the massacre, a chilling indication of her premeditation and planning. On the 5th day after purchase, she carried out her plan, ending both of her children's lives at their Tampa Palms home. She wrote in her journal afterward, "Oft bow in the van." After the acts, Schenecker attempted to end her own life through an overdose of medication combined with other means. Her mother, concerned after not hearing from her daughter for an unusual period, requested a welfare check on January 28th. Tampa police officers found Julie unconscious and covered in evidence of what had transpired. Emergency responders transported her to a hospital, where she survived and was placed under arrest. How did the defense try to prove she was legally insane? The trial began in April 2014 in Hillsborough County Circuit Court and lasted for weeks. The defense team presented extensive psychiatric testimony, arguing Julie was in a psychotic state due to her multiple mental illnesses and could not appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions at the time. Multiple psychiatrists testified about her diagnoses, her history of severe depression requiring months of hospitalization, and the medications she was taking. They argued the combination of her mental illnesses had created a complete break with reality. The prosecution countered with evidence of premeditation that undermined the insanity defense. The journal entries written before and after, the gun purchase, the 3-day wait that she acknowledged, and her methodical execution of the plan. They brought their own psychiatric experts, who testified that while Julie certainly had mental illnesses, she knew what she was doing was wrong, as evidenced by her attempts to hide evidence and her detailed journal entries. Lead prosecutor Jay Pruner argued she was depressed and angry at her children, not legally insane. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on both counts, suggesting they found the evidence of premeditation overwhelming and rejected the insanity defense. Judge Emmett Lamar Battles sentenced her to 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, Schenecker made a brief statement. "I know I shot my son and daughter. I don't know why." Words that seemed to contradict the extensive evidence of planning presented at trial. Julie Schenecker is incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution Annex in Marion County, Florida, one of the state's largest women's prisons with a notorious reputation for violence and poor conditions. In October 2022, she filed a pro se motion for a new trial, arguing her attorneys had been ineffective in defending her and should have pursued different strategies. After a February 2023 evidentiary hearing where the court examined the defense strategy in extensive detail, Judge Michelle Sisko denied the motion on February 17, 2023. The judge found that Schenecker's attorneys had made reasonable, strategic decisions in how they presented her defense and that their performance met constitutional standards. Parker Schenecker, devastated by the loss of his children and the destruction of his family, established the Calix and Bo Schenecker Memorial Fund, which promotes youth arts and athletics programs in their memory. He has largely stayed out of the public eye since the trial concluded, focusing on honoring his children's memory through charitable work rather than dwelling on the tragedy. The Schenecker case highlighted the dangers of leaving someone with severe, documented mental illness alone with children and raised serious questions about military family support systems during deployments and whether enough was done to protect vulnerable family members. From a case involving documented mental illness to one where warning signs were tragically ignored by the system, the next involves a mother who sought help just days before the unthinkable. Jessica McCarty. Born approximately 1982, Jessica McCarty had a documented history of mental health struggles and substance addiction that defined much of her adult life and limited her opportunities. According to her defense attorney, she sought help just days leading up to the acts, desperately trying to get treatment for her deteriorating mental state and increasing thoughts of harm. However, the mental health system failed to provide adequate intervention in time to prevent the tragedy that was building. She battled painkiller addiction for years, and in 2013, she was arrested for stealing prescription pads while working as a certified nursing assistant with access to medical facilities. She failed drug tests repeatedly and was eventually expelled from drug court, a specialized program designed to help offenders with addiction issues avoid incarceration. In 2009, Child Protective Services investigated McCarty for inadequate supervision allegations, documenting concerns about her ability to care for her children while struggling with addiction and mental illness. Despite these clear red flags and documented concerns, her children remained in her care as she cycled through treatment programs and relapses without sustained improvement or stability. On March 20, 2015, at her Palm Bay, Florida home, McCarty ended the lives of all three of her children in an incident that shocked the community. The details of what occurred inside the home shocked even experienced first responders who had seen countless tragic scenes. She then called 911 herself, making the horrifying admission of what she had done to the emergency operator. When police arrived at the scene, they found McCarty in the front yard holding a butcher knife, having inflicted serious wounds on herself. Officers were forced to use non-lethal beanbag rounds to subdue her safely and take her into custody. In the driveway, investigators found a handwritten note in which she apologized for what she had to do, language suggesting she believed the acts were somehow necessary or merciful rather than harmful. This note would become crucial evidence in understanding her mental state. What evidence showed this was planned rather than a psychotic episode? Prosecutors examining the case found multiple indicators of premeditation despite McCarty's severe mental illness. The note itself suggested forethought and planning rather than an impulsive act. The fact that she called 911 immediately afterward demonstrated she understood the wrongfulness of her actions and was attempting to face consequences. Mental health experts who evaluated her diagnosed severe depression and other conditions, but prosecutors argued she retained the capacity to know right from wrong, even in her deteriorated state. On December 10, 2015, McCarty entered guilty pleas to 3 counts of first-degree premeditated ending of life. By pleading guilty, she avoided a trial where prosecutors would have presented graphic evidence and testimony to a jury. The state agreed to waive the death penalty in exchange for her plea, sparing her from potential execution. Prosecutor William Respes made a statement addressing the complexity of the case. "The crime was monstrous, and the issue for us is whether or not the defendant was a monster." His words captured the tension between acknowledging her mental illness while holding her accountable for her actions. Judge James Earp sentenced McCarty on the same day she pleaded guilty to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never be released from custody. During the sentencing, her mother made an emotional statement that resonated with mental health advocates. Jessica was failed by the mental health profession. Her mother's words highlighted the multiple systemic failures that contributed to the tragedy: the inability to access adequate mental health care, the fragmented addiction treatment system, and the lack of resources for struggling parents with severe mental illness. McCarty is serving her sentence in the Florida Department of Corrections, most likely at Lowell Correctional Institution, the state's primary facility for women serving long sentences. Because she pleaded guilty, she waived her right to appeal the conviction, and no appeals have been filed in her case. Prison records indicate she has been a compliant inmate who participates in available mental health treatment programs behind bars. While McCarty's mental illness was documented for years, the next case involved a woman whose decline was rapid and devastating. Rachel Henry. Born in August 1997 in San Diego, California, Rachel Henry was raised in Prague, Oklahoma, a small town where everyone knew each other and families looked out for one another. Her early life was marked by profound loss. Her father passed away during her high school years, and her mother died around the time her first child was born, leaving her without parental support or guidance during crucial years of young adulthood. A childhood friend later told investigators that Henry exhibited concerning behavior even as a youngster, recalling that Rachel would say disturbing things, talking about hurting or hitting people. These early warning signs would prove tragically prophetic years later. As an adult, Henry struggled with methamphetamine addiction, a problem that spiraled out of control and led to her losing custody of her children on 2 separate occasions through state intervention. The Arizona Department of Child Safety investigated her multiple times over several years, documenting serious concerns about her ability to parent while using substances and maintaining stability. Despite these interventions and documented problems, Henry regained custody of her children after completing required programs and convincing caseworkers she was ready. In June 2019, she moved to Phoenix specifically to be closer to her children, who were living with their great aunt while Henry worked on reunification. On January 20th, 2020, at the Phoenix home where she was staying temporarily while rebuilding her life, Henry ended the lives of all 3 of her children in a manner that would horrify investigators. According to court documents and testimony, the children's father and their great-aunt, Perla Rebolledo, were present in the house during parts of the evening. Henry reportedly carried out the acts in separate rooms or while the adults were occupied, under the guise of putting the children down for naps. In a particularly disturbing detail that emerged during the investigation, she then arranged their small bodies on the living room couch to make them appear as if they were sleeping peacefully. The children's great-aunt found them unresponsive. She immediately called 911 in a panic. Henry initially maintained they were simply napping and would wake up soon, but during police questioning, she eventually admitted what she had done. How did prosecutors build their case despite having no eyewitnesses to what occurred? The investigation revealed substantial forensic and circumstantial evidence that painted a clear picture. Henry was indicted on January 27, 2020, just 1 week after the acts, on 3 counts of first-degree ending of life. The legal proceedings were delayed multiple times due to COVID. 19 court closures that shut down the justice system, extensive mental health evaluations ordered by the court, and other procedural issues, dragging the case out for nearly 5 years while the children's family waited desperately for justice and closure. On December 12, 2024, after years of delays and legal maneuvering, Henry entered guilty pleas to all 3 counts of first-degree ending of life. The plea came as the case was finally approaching trial, suggesting her defense team recognized the overwhelming evidence against her and the futility of fighting the charges. On February 14, 2025, Valentine's Day, Judge Jeffrey Fish sentenced her to 3 consecutive natural life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would spend every remaining day of her life behind bars. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutor Christopher Sammons made a powerful statement about the lasting impact that extended far beyond the immediate victims. Some of the first responders are still in therapy, and have been affected by what happened, even though this was 5 years ago. His words highlighted how the brutality of the case traumatized not just the family, but also the emergency personnel and detectives who responded to the scene and investigated. The prosecutor's statement underscored that such acts create ripples of profound suffering that extend far beyond the immediate victims. The children's great-aunt, who had been caring for them and working diligently toward reunification with their mother, was devastated beyond words. She had trusted the system's decision to return the children to Rachel and could not reconcile how someone could harm their own children after fighting so hard to regain custody and rebuild their family. Henry was recently sentenced and is now incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections, most likely at Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville, the state's primary facility for women serving long sentences. A restitution hearing for $30,000 was scheduled for April 4, 2025, to determine what financial obligations she would face for the costs associated with the investigation, prosecution, and victim services provided. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From a case highlighting child welfare failures to one involving religious extremism and conspiracy, the next would shock the nation and dominate headlines. Lori Vallow Daybell. Born June 26, 1973, in San Bernardino, California, Lori Vallow grew up in a family involved in sovereign citizen ideology that would later influence her worldview. Married 5 times throughout her adult life, Vallow's trajectory changed dramatically around 2015 when she became obsessed with apocalyptic author Chad Daybell's doomsday prophecies and extremist religious teachings. She came to believe she was a god assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 inches at Christ's second coming, a delusion that would have deadly consequences. Together with Chad Daybell, the couple developed a disturbing light-dark rating system for classifying people as zombies who needed to be eliminated from the earth to prepare for the end times. In 2019 to 2020, multiple suspicious deaths occurred connected to Vallow and Daybell that would eventually unravel their conspiracy. Her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, was shot in July 2019 by her brother Alex Cox in what was initially claimed as self-defense. Her 2 children, Tylee and JJ, were last seen in September 2019, and their remains were discovered in June 2020, buried on Chad Daybell's property in Idaho. Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, died in October 2019, initially attributed to natural causes but later determined to be from asphyxiation. Vallow lied repeatedly to police about her children's whereabouts and fled to Hawaii with Chad, whom she married just weeks after Tammy's passing, showing shocking callousness. How did investigators finally uncover the truth? Concerned relatives reported the children missing when Vallow refused to produce them or explain their location. Police in Idaho conducted welfare checks but were met with deception. Vallow and Daybell fled to Hawaii, living in a beachfront condo while enjoying a honeymoon, as authorities frantically searched for the missing children. The investigation intensified when it became clear the children had not been seen for months. On February 20th, 2020, Vallow was arrested in Hawaii on charges related to deserting and abandoning her children. She still refused to disclose their location or cooperate with investigators. The breakthrough came in June 2020 when FBI agents and local law enforcement executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's rural Idaho property. They discovered the children's remains buried on the property, confirming the worst fears of investigators and family members. The condition of the remains and the locations where they were found suggested deliberate concealment and planning. Her May 2023 Idaho trial lasted several weeks and featured testimony from family members, law enforcement, and experts who explained the couple's bizarre belief system. The jury heard evidence of text messages between Vallow and Daybell discussing their victims as zombies and dark spirits. Prosecutors presented a methodical case showing how financial motives combined with religious extremism to create a deadly conspiracy. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts: first-degree ending of life and conspiracy to commit such acts. Judge Stephen Boyce made a powerful statement at sentencing. "The most unimaginable kind of act is a mother taking the lives of her own children." He sentenced her to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never walk free. The courtroom erupted in emotion as family members who had fought for justice finally saw accountability. But the legal proceedings were far from over. In April and June 2025, Vallow was convicted in 2 separate Arizona trials for conspiring to end the life of Charles Vallow and Brandon Boudreaux, her niece's ex-husband, who survived a shooting attempt in October 2019. These trials revealed the broader scope of the conspiracy and how many people the couple had targeted for elimination. On July 25, 2025, Arizona sentencing added 2 additional consecutive life sentences plus $534,000 in fines to her existing punishment. Vallow is currently incarcerated at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho after being extradited from Arizona in August 2025. Multiple appeals are pending before the Idaho Supreme Court, though legal experts consider them unlikely to succeed given the overwhelming evidence. In a March 2025 Dateline interview, Vallow maintained her innocence from prison, claiming Jesus showed her she would be exonerated and that the truth would eventually emerge. In October 2024, she made the stunning claim on a recorded call that Tylee accidentally ended JJ's life, contradicting all forensic evidence and further demonstrating her detachment from reality. Her co-defendant, Chad Daybell, was sentenced to the ultimate punishment on June 1, 2024, after being convicted in a separate trial. He sits on death row while his appeals proceed through Idaho courts. The case has been the subject of numerous documentaries, podcasts, and television specials, captivating audiences with its bizarre mixture of religious extremism, financial greed, and calculated harm. While religious delusion played a central role in Vallow's case, the next involves a mother whose developmental disabilities were exploited by a dangerous partner. Pearl Fernandez. Born August 29, 1983, in California, Pearl Fernandez had a traumatic childhood marked by instability and hardship. Her father was frequently incarcerated throughout her youth, and she alleged physical harm by her mother, creating a chaotic home environment. She began using methamphetamine at age 9, ran away from home at 11, and dropped out of school after 8th grade, never receiving adequate education or support. Testing revealed her verbal comprehension was at a 2 ND grade level, and she was diagnosed with developmental disability, depressive disorder, and PTSD. She left Gabriel at the hospital 3 days after his birth and later regained custody in September 2012. 6 prior DCFS investigations had occurred before the final tragedy, documenting ongoing concerns. From October 2012 to May 2013, Gabriel Fernandez suffered 8 months of escalating harm by Fernandez and her boyfriend Isauro Aguirre at their Palmdale, California home. Teachers, family members, and others reported concerns to authorities multiple times, but social workers failed to adequately intervene despite clear warning signs and visible injuries. The young boy was subjected to horrific conditions that no person should endure, particularly not from those meant to protect them. On May 22, 2013, Fernandez called 911 claiming Gabriel had hit his head on a dresser. When paramedics arrived at the Palmdale apartment, they found catastrophic injuries that clearly did not match the explanation provided. Gabriel was transported to the hospital in critical condition. He was declared brain dead and removed from life support on May 24, 2013. The autopsy concluded his passing resulted from blunt force injuries aggravated by neglect and malnourishment, with evidence of prolonged suffering. How did the justice system respond to this horrific case? Both Fernandez and Aguirre were charged with first-degree ending of life with special circumstances. Aguirre went to trial in 2017 and was sentenced to the ultimate punishment after a jury heard the full scope of what Gabriel endured. Fernandez, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against her, pleaded guilty on February 15, 2018, to avoid facing the same fate. Judge George Lomely made a statement that captured the community's horror. The conduct was horrendous, inhumane, and nothing short of evil. She was sentenced on June 7, 2018, to life without the possibility of parole. Fernandez is currently incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility, CCWF, in Chowchilla, the largest women's prison in the United States with a population of thousands. In April 2021, she sought resentencing under amended California law that allows some defendants to petition for reduced sentences based on mental health issues and other factors. However, Judge Lomely denied the petition on June 1, 2021, stating that the nature of the acts and the vulnerability of the victim warranted the original sentence despite any mitigating factors. The Netflix documentary, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, 2020, brought renewed national attention to the case and sparked major reforms in child welfare systems. The six-part series detailed the multiple failures of DCFS social workers who missed opportunities to save Gabriel despite numerous reports from concerned teachers and family members. The documentary led to criminal charges against 4 social workers who had been assigned to Gabriel's case, though those charges were eventually dismissed on appeal. The case resulted in sweeping changes to Los Angeles County's child welfare system, including mandatory reforms in how social workers investigate reports, increased oversight, and better training on recognizing signs of serious harm. Gabriel's Law was passed in California, making it easier to remove children from dangerous situations and holding social workers more accountable for their decisions. Izaro Aguirre remains on death row under California's execution moratorium, which was instituted by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019. As long as the moratorium remains in effect, he will not face execution despite his sentence. Gabriel's case became a symbol of child welfare system failures and prompted national conversations about protecting vulnerable children from harm. From a case that exposed systemic failures to one where those same systems repeatedly returned a child to danger, the next involves a Minnesota mother and a custody battle. Julissa Thaler. Born February 6, 1994, Julissa Thaler had extensive documented mental health issues that defined her life from a young age. She was in and out of mental institutions from ages 13, 18, diagnosed with depression, mood disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Her psychiatric history was well documented, with multiple hospitalizations and treatment attempts that failed to provide lasting stability. In January 2021, she presented to medical professionals with psychosis and hearing voices, telling her to end her own life, demonstrating the severity of her deteriorating mental state. Thaler lost custody of her son Eli Hart twice through Dakota County Child Protective Services due to documented concerns about her ability to parent safely. Despite these serious interventions and her psychiatric history, Dakota County returned Eli to her on a trial home visit in December 2021 and awarded her full custody on May 10, 2022, just days before the tragedy would unfold. This decision would later be scrutinized as a catastrophic failure of the child welfare system. On May 19, 2022, just 6 days after Eli's biological father, Torrey Hart, filed for custody seeking to protect his son, Thaler purchased ammunition at a store, asking the clerk for rounds that would blow the biggest hole. That night, she ended Eli's life. Investigators later discovered disturbing Google searches on her devices, including "How much blood can a 6-year-old lose?" and "qualifying accidental deaths," demonstrating premeditation and planning for the act and its aftermath. On May 20th, 2022, citizens reported a suspicious vehicle with a missing tire driving erratically. Orono police conducted a traffic stop and discovered Eli's body in the trunk of Thaler's Chevy Impala, leading to her immediate arrest. The discovery shocked the small Minnesota community and launched an investigation into how the system had failed to protect Eli. How did the prosecution overcome the defense's arguments? Thaler was initially charged with second-degree ending of life, but the charges were upgraded to first-degree after a grand jury indictment as the full scope of her planning became clear. At her January 2023 trial in Hennepin County, the defense argued that no eyewitnesses could prove Thaler pulled the trigger and suggested alternative theories. However, the prosecution presented overwhelming forensic evidence: the ammunition purchase, the Google searches, and Thaler's own behavior after the act. The jury convicted her of first-degree premeditated ending of life in less than 2 hours on February 8, 2023, finding the evidence of planning and intent overwhelming. At her sentencing on February 16, 2023, Thaler showed no remorse, instead shouting at the court, "I'm innocent. F*** you all. You're garbage." Her outburst demonstrated a complete lack of accountability for her actions. She received life without the possibility of parole. Thaler is currently incarcerated at MCF Shakopee in Minnesota, the state's primary facility for women serving long sentences. In December 2024, Torrey Hart reached a $2.25 million wrongful death settlement with Dakota County, holding the child welfare system accountable for returning Eli to a dangerous situation despite clear warning signs. The settlement acknowledged the county's failures to protect Eli. The family established the Eli Hart Foundation to advocate for child welfare reform and built a memorial playground at Surfside Beach in Mound, Minnesota, where Eli loved to play. The playground serves as a lasting tribute to his memory and a reminder of the need for better protection of vulnerable children. Eli's case sparked legislative efforts in Minnesota to reform how Child Protective Services evaluates parents with severe mental illness and to create better safeguards before returning children to custody after previous removals. From a custody battle that ended in tragedy to a case where mental illness went unrecognized until it was too late, the next involves postpartum psychosis. Carol Ann Coronado. Born approximately 1983 in the Los Angeles area, Carol Ann Coronado had a military background and trained as an X-ray technician, building what appeared to be a stable career path. She met her husband Rudy at a donut shop around 2010, and they began building a life together. However, according to defense testimony at trial, Coronado reported disturbing experiences from a young age, including hearing critical voices from age 5, being subjected to inappropriate situations as a youngster, and experiencing profound trauma during adolescence. She experienced progressively worsening postpartum depression after each pregnancy, with symptoms escalating but going largely unrecognized by medical professionals. She was placed on intensive watch for 21 months after her arrest, highlighting the severity of her mental state. On May 20, 2014, at the family's West Carson area home, Coronado ended the lives of her 3 young daughters, Sophia, Yasmin, and Zania, using multiple implements, including knives and a hammer. Her mother, Julie Piercy, discovered the horrific scene after receiving desperate voicemails from Carol throughout the day. The voicemails captured Carol's deteriorating state. "Mommy, please call me. Please, please, please. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm hungry." After the acts, Coronado stabbed herself in the chest multiple times, puncturing her lung in what appeared to be an attempt to follow her daughters. What role did postpartum psychosis play in the defense? The November 2015 bench trial before Judge Ricardo Ocampo in Compton Superior Court became a test of California's insanity standards. The defense presented testimony from multiple psychiatrists who diagnosed Coronado with severe postpartum psychosis, a rare but serious condition that can cause hallucinations, delusions, and a complete break from reality. These experts testified that she genuinely believed she was protecting her daughters from a worse fate and had lost the ability to distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution argued that despite her mental illness, she retained enough awareness to understand her actions were criminal. After hearing all evidence, Judge Ocampo issued his ruling on December 10, 2015, guilty on 3 counts of first-degree ending of life. He found her legally sane under California's strict Monotone test, which requires proof that the defendant could not distinguish right from wrong. He was sentenced on February 1, 2016, to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Coronado's defense team filed appeals to the California Court of Appeal in 2018 and the California Supreme Court in 2018, but both appeals were denied. The courts found that Judge Ocampo had properly applied the legal standard for insanity and that his findings were supported by the evidence. Coronado is currently incarcerated at CCWF Chowchilla, California's largest women's prison. According to 2020 reports, prison life has been difficult. She has been physically harmed by other inmates who call her baby killer, has delusions about imminent release, and sometimes refers to her daughters in the present tense, suggesting ongoing mental health struggles. Her psychiatric condition remains precarious behind bars. Her husband, Rudy Coronado, became a passionate mental health advocate in the aftermath of the tragedy. His testimony before the California legislature helped pass 2018 California laws requiring mandatory postpartum depression screening for new mothers, ensuring that healthcare providers assess women for signs of postpartum depression and psychosis. However, Rudy no longer visits or speaks with Carol, finding it too painful to maintain contact. The documentary Not Carol, 2019, examined her case in depth, exploring the medical and legal aspects of postpartum psychosis and questioning whether the justice system adequately accounts for this severe mental health condition. The film sparked important conversations about maternal mental health and the need for better screening and treatment. While Coronado's case involved unrecognized mental illness, the next shows a mother whose dangerous thoughts were known to authorities yet ignored. Lisa Snyder. Born approximately 1983, Lisa Snyder had documented mental illness dating to her teenage years, including an attempt to end her own life at age 16 after alleged inappropriate experiences by a family member. Her psychiatric history was extensive and well documented by mental health professionals over many years. In July 2014, Berks County Child and Youth Services took the extraordinary step of removing her children from her care after she admitted having thoughts about ending their lives, including disturbing fantasies about putting bottle caps and cords in her toddler's bed, hoping he would choke. These admissions should have been a major red flag requiring intensive intervention. Shockingly, despite these documented homicidal ideations, the children were returned to her in February 2015 after she completed required programs and convinced authorities she was stable. No long-term monitoring was put in place to ensure the children's safety. On September 23, 2019, at her Albany Township, Pennsylvania home, Snyder ended both of her children's lives in a basement using a dog lead she had ordered online the day before and picked up from Walmart that morning. Investigators discovered disturbing Google searches on her devices, revealing research into various methods including carbon monoxide in a car, how long to die, and hanging yourself, demonstrating she had been planning and researching the acts. She then called 911, fabricating an elaborate story that her son had been facing difficulties at school and convinced his sister to join him, because he was scared to go alone. How did investigators uncover her deception? Snyder was arrested on December 2, 2019, after a thorough investigation revealed numerous inconsistencies in her story. During the investigation, authorities discovered inappropriate images with the family dog on her devices, leading to additional serious charges beyond the ending of life counts. Prosecutors initially sought the ultimate punishment given the heinous nature of the acts and the vulnerability of the victims. However, Snyder's election of a bench trial instead of a jury trial made her ineligible for that sentence under Pennsylvania law, which requires a jury to impose such punishment. The September 2024 trial before Judge M. Teresa Johnson lasted several weeks and featured extensive mental health testimony from experts on both sides. The defense presented psychiatrists who testified about Snyder's long history of mental illness and argued she was in a psychotic state when she acted. The prosecution countered with the Google searches, the advanced planning of ordering the dog lead, and the fabricated story she told to 911, all demonstrating she knew what she was doing was wrong. Judge Johnson heard all evidence and returned guilty verdicts on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree ending of life. She called it the most distressing case she has seen in her years on the bench. On October 17, 2024, Judge Johnson sentenced Snyder to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole plus 8.5, 17 years for the additional charges. The judge stated that the premeditated nature of the acts and the betrayal of trust warranted the maximum sentence available under law. Snyder is currently serving her sentence in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, most likely at SCI Muncie, the state's primary facility for women. Her surviving son, Owen, who was 22 at the time of trial, bravely testified against her and delivered a powerful victim impact statement at sentencing, calling her a monster who destroyed his family. His courage in facing her in court moved everyone present. From a case where warning signs were ignored to one rooted in a bitter custody battle, the next involves a Louisiana mother and her battle for control. Amy Hebert. Born approximately 1966 in Matthews, Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, Amy Hebert was an honors student and cheerleader who worked as a teacher's aide, building what seemed like a stable, middle-class life. She married Chad Hebert in 1991, and they started a family together in the tight-knit Louisiana community. Their marriage ended in 2006 after she discovered his affair, shattering the life she had built. Their bitter divorce included increasingly contentious custody disputes that intensified throughout 2007, with both parents fighting for control. Hebert's family history included significant mental illness, a sister's psychotic breakdown, an uncle with schizophrenia, and her maternal grandfather's self-inflicted passing, suggesting a genetic vulnerability to severe psychiatric conditions. On August 20th, 2007, at her Matthews, Louisiana home, Hebert ended the lives of her 2 children and the family dog using 11 kitchen knives in a prolonged and brutal attack. She then turned the knives on herself, stabbing herself approximately 30 times in what appeared to be an attempt to follow them in passing. The self-inflicted wounds were severe, puncturing both lungs and exposing tendons in her wrists. She left behind notes expressing her belief that Chad would not be allowed to have the children. She later told a nurse at the hospital, "All I ever wanted was to be loved. Chad left me. I couldn't let him take the children away from me." Chad's father discovered the horrific scene after family members requested a welfare check when they couldn't reach Amy. What arguments did the defense present to try to save her from execution? Hebert's defense was handled by attorney George Parnham, the same attorney who had previously defended Andrea Yates in her infamous Texas case involving postpartum psychosis. Parnham argued that Hebert suffered from severe mental illness that rendered her legally insane at the time of the acts. The May 2009 trial in Louisiana lasted nearly 2 weeks as the defense presented extensive psychiatric testimony about her family history of mental illness and her deteriorating state during the custody battle. The jury heard evidence of her psychotic symptoms, delusional thinking, and the genetic factors that made her vulnerable to severe psychiatric breaks. However, they also heard about the planning involved, the multiple weapons used, and the notes she left behind. After deliberating, the jury convicted her on May 15, 2009, after less than 2 hours, finding the evidence of premeditation overwhelming despite the mental health testimony. In the penalty phase, the jury had to decide between recommending life without parole or the ultimate punishment. They voted 9-3 in favor of the ultimate outcome, falling short of the unanimous requirement needed under Louisiana law at that time. Judge Jerome Barbera sentenced her on June 24, 2009, to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, reflecting the jury's inability to reach unanimity on a harsher sentence. Hebert's defense team filed multiple appeals over the following decade, arguing ineffective assistance of counsel, improper jury instructions, and other legal issues. However, all appeals were exhausted by April 2019, when the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear her case, marking the end of her legal remedies. She remains incarcerated in the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women system. In August 2025, a significant change occurred when the new $160+ million LCIW facility opened in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, the first prison built in Louisiana in over 35 years. Hebert would have been transferred to this modern facility, which replaced the aging Angola facility that had housed Louisiana's women since the 1960s. The new facility includes improved mental health services and programming. Memorials honoring her children were established throughout Lafourche Parish to ensure they are not forgotten. These include Braxton's Buddies Playground and Camille's Court basketball court at local schools, plus scholarships established at Nicholls State University in their names to help other children pursue education. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.